This guy is the best he has ever seen.
Do you hate each other when you fight?
Mark Kerr rose from amateur wrestling to become one of mixed martial arts' most feared heavyweights. Nicknamed the Smashing Machine, he dominated no-holds-barred tournaments in the late 90s while battling chronic injuries and a growing dependence on painkillers. His raw power and ground-and-pound approach made him a star on both the Japanese circuit and American shows. Kerr's decline and eventual recovery were laid bare in an acclaimed HBO documentary and later adapted for a theatrical biopic. This list pulls together verified shocks and lesser-known moments from his rise, fall, and fight for sobriety. This is 20 insane facts about Mark Kerr, the Smashing Machine. That said, before we get into our list, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to the channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. From backyard wrestling to Olympic dreams. Long before he stepped into arenas, Mark Kerr and his sibling turned their backyard into a make-believe wrestling ring with cardboard belts and improvised moves. This childhood play fueled a growing obsession with grappling that led him toward organized wrestling at Bettendorf High School and later in Toledo after his family relocated. In college, he wrestled for Syracuse, where he honed his technique, strength, and competitive instinct, accumulating notable amateur achievements. After graduating, Kerr moved to Arizona and trained intensely for several years with the clear aim of earning a spot on the United States Olympic freestyle team. Those Olympic trials between 1992 and 96 became the measuring stick for his ambitions. Unfortunately, he fell short of making the roster and suffered a severe neck injury during the selection process, including cracked vertebrae and herniated discs. That brutal setback forced him to rethink his future, yet it also underscored a gritty determination born in backyard matches and polished through years of discipline. These formative chapters illustrate how a boyish dream about the WWF evolved into a serious pursuit of Olympic glory, and how early imagination eventually confronted the harsh realities of elite sport, ultimately shaping his competitive identity. High school wrestling prodigy. As a high school athlete, Kerr moved through the ranks with a speed that made coaches take notice. Training alongside older, accomplished grapplers helped him learn advanced takedowns and mat control early on. He rose to become a state champion for his Ohio school, a title that confirmed his natural power and technical promise. Local tournaments became proving grounds where he developed a reputation for a relentless work ethic, arriving at practice before teammates and finishing long after sessions ended. Strength training and focused drilling turned raw athleticism into repeatable techniques opponents found difficult to counter. Teachers and coaches spoke of a competitor who combined calm under pressure with an appetite for improvement, traits that college scouts respected. By the time he was ready to leave secondary school, he had established a resume strong enough to open doors to top collegiate programs. Those formative seasons sharpened a competitive intelligence and physical foundation that proved crucial in later national and international competitions. He often helped younger teammates refine their technique and became a de facto leader in the room and team culture development. His willingness to learn from his losses and to return stronger after setbacks consistently defined his teenage years. Collegiate Wrestling Champion. At Syracuse University, Kerr reached the peak of his college career when he won the 1992 NCAA Division I championship at 190 pounds, a milestone that still stands out in the program's history. His title match ended in a convincing margin over Randy Couture, which underlined Kerr's ability to control elite opponents on the mat. During his collegiate years, he also collected 3 Eastern Intercollegiate Wrestling Association championships and earned the Fletcher Award for scoring the most team points in consecutive seasons. By the conclusion of the 1991-92 cycle, he had posted more than 30 victories. He finished the year with only a few losses, a record that earned him All-American recognition. Coaches and teammates remember him for his relentless practice habits, a heavy hand in upper body control, and instinct for turning positional chances into decisive scores. Those accomplishments transformed him from a strong regional competitor to a national fighter in amateur wrestling and set the stage for his later international freestyle campaigns. The university still cites his title among its proudest moments. First UFC heavyweight tournament victory. Mark Kerr's first UFC tournament victory arrived at UFC 14 in Birmingham on July 27, 1997, a debut that announced his arrival on the international mixed martial arts scene. Competing in a format that required 2 fights in one night, he opened by overwhelming Israeli martial artist Moti Horenstein. He stopped him by technical knockout at 2 minutes and 22 seconds in the opening round. That win propelled Kerr into the tournament final, where he met Dan Bobish and finished the bout at 1 minute 38 seconds with a chin-to-the-eye submission. Those back-to-back finishes gave him the UFC 14 heavyweight tournament title and marked the start of his brief but dramatic run inside the octagon. The combined ring time for both victories ran under 5 minutes and left no doubt about his finishing instincts among observers, matchmakers, and future opportunities. Back-to-back UFC tournament titles. Winning consecutive UFC heavyweight tournaments cemented Mark Kerr as one of the most feared grapplers of his era and showed how quickly he could dismantle opponents inside the cage. On October 17, 1997, he returned for UFC 15 and tore through the night's bracket in a matter of moments at Casino Magic Bay, St. Louis. Kerr opened the tournament with a brutal knee that put Greg Stott away in just 17 seconds, a finish that underscored his explosive entry into stand-up exchanges. He then faced replacement Dwayne Kaysen in the final and forced a submission at 53 seconds with a rear-naked choke, leaving no doubt about his dominance that evening. Back-to-back tournament wins elevated his profile among promoters and fans, helping to create the legend behind his nickname. After that run, Kerr opted to pursue opportunities in Japan, where bigger purses and new challenges awaited, making UFC 15 his final appearance in the organization. Those 2 successive tournament triumphs remain a defining chapter in his competitive legacy and a reminder of how brief moments in a fight reshape a career. World Vale Tudo Championship Triumph. Mark Kerr's first major outing outside the U.S. took place at a rough and raw tournament in Sao Paulo on January 19, 1997, where he entered as a relative unknown and left as the event's dominant force. Across one brutal night, he won 3 separate matches to claim the heavyweight crown, a display that turned heads in the fighting world and proved his skills translated beyond amateur mats. His opening bout ended when he overwhelmed seasoned veteran Paul Verelans with his forceful takedowns and heavy strikes, forced the referee to stop the fight. In his second contest, a Brazilian striker effectively quit the ring by crawling out to avoid further punishment, which resulted in an immediate disqualification, advanced Kerr to the final. The championship match pitted him against a respected jiu-jitsu competitor and lasted long enough to test conditioning, resolve, and technique before Kerr emerged with the victory. That night did more than add a trophy to Kerr's shelf. It introduced his aggressive pressure game to an international audience and opened doors to bigger promotions and higher purses overseas. Pride FC competitor. In Japan, Kerr became a fixture inside Pride, where his wrestling first met a very different rule set and a louder, more theatrical crowd. He was originally slated to face Royce Gracie early in his Pride run. Still, that matchup never happened, and he instead took on heavyweight names promoted for television-sized arenas. Kerr collected several impressive victories in the promotion while also suffering dramatic setbacks that exposed the thin margin between dominance and decline. A notorious episode occurred against Igor Vovchanchin, where an initial knockout from knee strikes was later ruled a no contest amid controversy and confusion. He pushed through the Pride Grand Prix to reach the final stage, only to lose on the judges' cards to a rugged opponent in a bout that left him battle-scarred and stitched after the contest. Later fights included a quick submission victory and a brutal accidental head spike that ended one comeback attempt early and helped convince him to step away from the company. Across those years in Japan, Kerr showed a complicated mix of elite grappling skills, vulnerability under heavy striking, the kind of resilience that kept fans guessing about what he might do next. Nickname origins. Early in his career, Kerr carried more than one handle in the fight world. IMDb lists alternative tags such as the Specimen and the Titan, alongside the more familiar Smashing Machine, which shows how promoters and press tried different labels to capture his image. Over time, the phrase Smashing Machine moved from fight posters and announcer banter into broader media usage, and it stuck as the most recognizable name attached to boxing and MMA programs printed the nickname on flyers and fighter bios, which helped it travel beyond local shows and into international coverage. A later cinematic project used the same wording as its title, which further solidified the nickname in public memory and tied the phrase to his sporting persona in books and articles that followed. Fans and journalists continued to use the name because it was short, sharp, and easy to market, because it contrasted with other quieter labels he carried in early listings. Taken together, these traces show that the tag grew less from a single moment, more from repeated use across promotional material, programs, and reportage until it became the way most people recognized him. Painkiller Addiction. What began as routine pain management turned into a life-threatening opioid dependency for Mark Kerr. He said that taking medication was a pragmatic decision to shorten recovery windows and stay available for fights, which made the habit feel necessary. His descent reached a crisis point in 1999 when he overdosed and spent hours near unconsciousness in a hospital bed. The HBO documentary captures moments from that period, including delirium that caused him to confuse eras and people. Friends debated the next steps. On camera, Kerr is shown using syringes, then emptying garbage bags of pills and needles as he's confronting the damage done to his life. Those raw scenes helped shape public understanding of how prescription drugs can escalate into addiction in a sport built on repeated injury. Personal relationships also turned into a pressure valve and a mirror. His partner warned that she would walk away if he didn't seek help, and that ultimatum pushed him towards treatment and sobriety. Kerr later spoke candidly about shame, isolation, and how hard it was to ask for help. His story became a cautionary example in discussions about fighter welfare, opioid risk management, hope. Overdose survival. October 1999 brought the kind of blackout that wakes a life up. Mark Kerr collapsed from an opioid overdose and was rushed to the hospital, where doctors worried for his life. Lying there, he found himself trying to name the president and failing, which snapped something loose inside him and made it clear how far he had drifted. The immediate aftermath was raw and decisive. He gathered the pills and needles that had crawled into his life and tossed them away. He withdrew from a scheduled fight and entered a rehab program where he spent weeks facing withdrawal, therapy, and the slow, hard work of rebuilding trust with friends and loved ones. That near-death experience didn't instantly fix everything, but it did mark a turning point for Kerr. Nightmares and panic lingered, and the way his body remembered the overdose stayed with him. Still, he kept returning to training and to the ring with a steadier sense of purpose. Survivors often speak of a new fragility that also brings clarity. Friends later said the change was painful but unmistakably real. He later described the moment as terrifying and clarifying, and vowed to face addiction honestly with help from specialists and teammates. Final. Relationship with Dawn Staples. The pair married in 2000 after a quick, intense courtship that swept both of them out of everyday life and into each other's company, also publicly. She had worked as a model and later reinvented herself through property and design projects, while he continued to fight. The marriage was passionate and volatile, a partnership that sometimes pulled them together and other times pushed them apart. Friends and teammates described the pair as deeply loyal but easily caught in the same self-destructive patterns. Arguments often swirled around money, expectations, and the corrosive effects of substance use on mood and day-to-day decisions. Those close to them say they tried to support one another and that love and loyalty coexisted with pain and mistrust. They became parents during their marriage, sharing the joys and heavier burdens that come with raising a child while living in the glare of the public limelight. After several years, they separated and eventually divorced, though both appear to have moved into new chapters in their lives and maintained occasional contact. Their story reads like an honest portrait of two people who loved fiercely, struggled together, and whose lives were forever changed by choices made when the lights were brightest. Separation and personal growth. Stepping away from the chaos of professional fighting gave Mark Kerr a quieter calendar and a different kind of responsibility. Working at a car dealership meant shifts, customer calls, paperwork, and the small predictable duties that hold a day together. Those everyday tasks become a form of repair, practice in showing up and finishing what you started. Routine replaces adrenaline for a while and taught Kerr to value consistency over instant gains. Alongside that work, he adopted gentler training habits, better sleep patterns, or attentive medical checkups, all of which supported a steadier mind. Conversations with colleagues turned into informal therapy sessions where listening mattered more than being the loudest voice in the room. He also explored business opportunities that kept him connected to the sport without needing to live inside its chaos. People close to him say the change was gradual and often messy, but real from small choices repeated over months and years. This quieter life didn't rewrite his history, but offered him new tools to manage it. In the end, growth looked less like a single revelation and more like 1,000 modest acts added together into a life that could finally breathe. UFC Hall of Fame induction. When the UFC announced that Mark Kerr would enter the Hall of Fame as a pioneer in 2025, it felt like a long overdue nod to a fighter whose grit helped shape the early days of mixed martial arts. The ceremony took place during International Fight Week at the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas on June 26th. It brought together friends, rivals, and the community that's watched the sport grow. Kerr walked on stage to applause and a short and heartfelt introduction from Dwayne Johnson, who later described the moment as deeply meaningful. The induction celebrated more than wins on a record. It honored the raw influence of fighters who competed before MMA became the global industry it is today. Among the class were other familiar names, which made the night feel like a bridge between eras and a reminder of how many paths lead to this room. For Kerr, the honor read like recognition of his role in early UFC tournaments and of the mark he left on teammates and opponents alike. People who saw him accept the awards said his gratitude was quiet but unmistakable, and that the moment gave him a peaceful kind of closure about his place in the sport. Dwayne Johnson's portrayal. Dwayne Johnson has long been associated with blockbuster muscle and high-stakes spectacle, yet this performance asks him to do something quieter and far more vulnerable. He sheds the familiar bravado to live inside a man whose life was full of private ruin and stubborn tenderness. Johnson worked with a director known for their raw, intimate storytelling and utilized prosthetics and physical coaching to immerse themselves in the role fully. Watching him, you feel the effort of someone trying to find patience rather than power, and the choice to let a soft voice or a small awkward gesture carry an entire scene. The result isn't a stunt or a novelty act, but an actor pushing against the shape of his career to show vulnerability and regret. Interviews with the filmmaker and Johnson make clear that this was never about flexing star wattage, but about surrendering to discomfort and being willing to hurt on camera when the story demands it. For viewers, this shift is unnerving in a good way because it asks them to meet a familiar face with unfamiliar sorrow and accept that reinvention can be a humble and difficult thing. Film's emotional premiere. The premiere hummed with the kind of electric hush that only a festival screening can create. As the credits rolled, the room rose together and the applause stretched on and on until it felt less like approval and more like a communal exhale. People who were there later described the sound as sustained and almost ceremonial because it came from both longtime cinephiles and casual viewers who had been unexpectedly moved. For many, the reaction felt like an acknowledgement of restraint in the filmmaking and of performances that trusted quiet over spectacle. Journalists in the aisles scribbled notes about how the film lingered long after the last frame and how conversations outside the theater stayed focused on character instead of gimmick. A handful of industry figures called the night a turning point for the movie and for the main actor, who had taken big risks to inhabit a real person with messy flaws. For viewers, the moment was equal parts relief and celebration because stories about human fragility don't always connect so fully in a crowded room after the screening. People queued to share memories of how the film impacted them, thank the filmmakers for telling a story that felt honest and, at times, unbearably close to real life. From NCAA Showdown to signature win. The 1992 final between Mark Kerr and Randy Couture read like a statement match that announced a new force in American wrestling. Kerr controlled position and pace for much of the bout and finished with a decisive 12-4 score that left little doubt about who dictated the mat. Watching footage or reading bout notes, you can see why observers still point to this match when talking about Kerr's competitive DNA. He combined brute strength with grounded technique and used tempo changes to turn small openings into scoring bursts. That blend of physicality and timing is the thing coaches would later cite when explaining how elite wrestlers adapted so well to mixed martial arts. For Randy Couture, the loss was a detour rather than an endpoint. He regrouped and went on to build his own legend in both wrestling and later in MMA. The two men meeting at that stage gives the match an almost mythic quality now, as it paired future Hall of Famers when both were still carving out their paths. Decades on, the bout is more than a scoreline. It's a snapshot of a moment when amateur wrestling produced fighters who would help create a new sport. People who study that era still consider this match an example of how wrestling technique, size, and competitiveness combine to change combat sports forever. ADCC Submission Dominance. There was something almost clinical about how Mark Kerr carried himself on the ADCC mats because he treated submission fighting like an extension of elite wrestling rather than a separate sport. He used relentless pressure and precise top control to smother guards and turn small positional advantages into dominant positions that judges and opponents found hard to reverse. At times, he faced dramatic size differences in the absolute brackets, yet turned those mismatches into tactical advantages by cutting off space, forcing lighter, more technical practitioners into scrambles where his strength and balance ultimately decided the outcome. A handful of matches became shorthand for that approach because they showed how a wrestler could neutralize slick submissions without relying on elaborate submission chains. Kerr also handled the mental strain of tournament formats well by resetting between rounds and keeping a measured tempo instead of chasing flashy wins. Teammates and rivals later described his presence as quietly intimidating because it removed options from the table for whoever stepped into the mat with him. Beyond the results that filled record books, the feeling he left in the room was of someone who bridged two combat worlds and forced grapplers of every style to rethink how they prepared for elite, no-gi competitions. Olympic dreams and turning points. Mark Kerr built his identity around the mat long before he ever set foot in the cage. Relentless practices, late nights drilling takedowns, and the weight of an Olympic dream shaped his rhythm. Through the early 90s, he sparred with the very best and exchanged hard lessons with future stars, learning to carry disappointment and still show up. When the final selection for Atlanta proved to be out of reach, it hit him like a sudden weather shift. Missing that ticket forced a practical question onto the table. How do you keep fighting when the old roadmap disappears? For Kerr, the answer was messy and honest. He drifted towards mixed martial arts because it let him use everything he had learned in wrestling, while also offering a living wage and a fresh kind of respect. The move wasn't a celebrity moment, but a slow pivot born of necessity and an athlete's refusal to stop grappling with challenge. This chapter of his life is as much about resilience as it is about what happens when an ambition reroutes and a new path appears under your feet. His story shows how defeat can become a strange kind of doorway to reinvention. The HBO Portrait. HBO's 2002 documentary, The Smashing Machine, pulls back the curtain on an era of fighting that felt raw and precarious. Directed by John Hyams, the camera follows Mark Kerr through bruises, medical checks, and quiet moments that reveal how competition and personal demons converge. The film avoids spectacle and instead lingers on attempts at recovery, fractured relationships, and the repetitive labor of training. Some scenes are lodged in the memory of viewers, such as a waiting room exchange where Kerr tries to explain a fighter's inner life, grainy tournament footage that first made him a household name among fight fans. Editing and interviews create an intimate rhythm and a disturbing emotional honesty. Critics praise the documentary for refusing to offer easy narratives and for highlighting the human cost of extreme sports. For modern audiences looking beyond highlight reels, the film remains a blunt and necessary portrait as it shows the steady work of living after shock, the complicated truth, courage, and self-destruction can sometimes coexist. It premiered on HBO on the 31st of May, 2002, and runs 78 minutes, a compact but searing look at the era. It is considered essential viewing for fight enthusiasts today. The Wrestler's Circle. Training rooms smell of sweat and chalk and the constant thump of feet landing. For Mark Kerr, those rooms became a close-knit crew where size met craft and where competition felt practical rather than theatrical. Mark Coleman, Tom Erickson, and Kerr ran endless rounds of situational sparring and live wrestling to see who could stay steady when plans broke. Coleman demonstrated forward pressure that wore opponents down. Erickson supplied raw, relentless power learned in high-level amateur tournaments. Kerr added a searching technical sense for leverage. The trio traded roles as partner, critic, and coach. The practice became a laboratory for problem-solving under fatigue. Those men did more than drill takedowns. They worked timing, transitions, and control in ways that folded into early no-holds-barred matchups and into the first wave of heavyweight grapplers. Their habits taught younger fighters that size need not mean sloppiness. Careful positioning could set up devastating finishes. Personal bonds kept the lessons alive beyond any single bout. Long after the gyms emptied, the methods those wrestlers refined continued to ripple through the sport and shaped how heavyweights learned to wrestle, while also learning to finish like a true mixed martial artist. Marvelous verdict! Fans and historians still argue over how to sum up Mark Kerr's career. On paper, his professional record shows 15 wins, 11 defeats, and 1 no contest. Those numbers capture part of the arc, but not the sudden stops in momentum or the raw power he brought to big fights. He became a name people mentioned when discussing heavyweight evolution, and also a reminder of how quickly physical peak and private life can collide. For some, his story reads like a hard-earned legend. For others, it's a cautionary note about costs and consequences. Either way, Mark Kerr's presence in the sports story continues to spark debate today. That's all we got for you this time, but if you enjoyed the content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Otherwise, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and have a marvelous day.